Chapter 6 Crossing the Delaware. The huge boat rocked in the water. Giant chunk of ice smashed against its sides. "Thank a lot, Annie," Jack whispered. He shivers in the snowy cold. "We're not supposed to go on their secret missions with them." "It's okay," she whispered. "Maybe we can help George Washington." "Are you nuts?" Jack whispered. "You should be on our way home now." The boat hit a piece of ice. The boat bounced and dipped into the water. Jack clung in the wooden sides. He hoped they wouldn't turn over. Nobody could survive in this ice water, he thought. It would be like sinking on the Titanic. The crew fought hard to keep the boat moving forward. They rowed past chunks of ice into smoother parts of the river. Light from oil lamp shone in the water, making an ice clunk behind them glow like huge glittering jewels. Jack looked back. Other boats were following them. They were filled with soldiers, horses, and cannons. "Where exactly are we going?" Annie whispered. Jack shrugged. He reached into his bag and pulled out the Revolutionary War book. But the dim lanterns lit in the boats. He searched through the book. He found the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware River. He showed the painting to Annie. They each read the caption silently. After George Washington crossed the Delaware, he led his men on the 9 miles march to the bridge post. The post was filled with Hessians, German soldiers hired by Bush to fight for them. The American pirates caught them off guard. The Hessians never thought the pirates would attack on the stormy Christmas night. It was a great victory for the pirates. They captured almost 1,000 Hessians. Hardly anything of Washington's men were lost. "Yay, we wouldn't have to send the captain letters," Annie explained. "Shh," said Jack. But George Washington turned around and looked back at Jack and Annie. "Oh no," Jack thought. "Cut again." He closed his eyes as if that would make him invisible. "He's coming," said Annie. Jack looked up. George Washington was making his way back toward them. In the next moment, the commander-in-chief loomed above them like a giant shadow. "Jordan?" he asked in the quiet, angry voice. "Sorry," Jack squeaked. "Merry Christmas," said Annie. But George Washington didn't say Magic Christmas back. Chapter 7 Spies. "What are you doing here?" George Washington asked. The commander-in-chief sounded furious. "We make a mistake," Jack says. We didn't mean to come." George Washington turned to the rower. "Who let these children sneak aboard?" he asked in the stern voice. The man looked at Jack and Annie with surprise. "It's not their fault," Annie said quickly. "They were working too hard to notice us." Just then the boat banged against the ice. The ice cracked. The boat moved on, then bumped against the shore. Two soldiers jumped out and pulled the boat off on the shores. George Washington looked at Jack and Danny. "This boat is returning to get more men," he says. "When it does, you two will get out and stay on the other shores." "Yes, sir," said Jack. He felt very embarrassed. George Washington then gave orders to the rowers. Make sure those children do not board any other boat when you return, he says. The general stepped onto the riverbank. The wind started to pick up. The snow fell harder. As the crew unlocked the boat, neither Jack nor Annie spoke. Jack was miserable. They had caused trouble for George Washington just when the general was trying to make America an independent nation. Jack desperately wished he and Annie had gone home earlier. Then they watched more and more boats land on the riverbank. As the soldiers unloaded their weapons and horses, a freezing rain began. Now rain, snow, and sleet fell together. Jack heard George Washington come to one of his men. This storm is getting worse, Majors, the general says. Yes, sir, the major says. I think we're in the blizzard, said Washington. Yes, sir, our missions may be hopeless, sir, said Majors. Should we call it off? No, you shouldn't, Jack whispered. You're going to win. Should we turn back, sir, said Majors. The major says. No, no, said Annie. She stood up. The boat rocked. Don't turn back, Washington, sir. George Washington, sir, she shouted. You have to march on, sirs. You have to attack the Hastings, sir. Shh! Jack tried to pull Annie back down. We're not supposed to know about their secret missions. How does she know our plan, Majors? George Washington asked. Listen to us, sir, said Annie. You're going to win. She pulled away from Jack and jumped out of the boat. Annie! Jack leaped onto the riverbank. He scrambled after Annie up the steep icy slope. You have to land your man, General Washington, sir, Annie says. The Hastings will be surprised. They think no army will be marching on the night like this. How do you know all this? The major shouted above the storms. How do you know what the Hastings are doing and thinking? For once, Annie seemed at the loss for word. She just gasped, said Jack. Just then the buried soldiers who had yelled at Jack earlier stepped forward. I see this boy earlier, he said. He was writing things down. No, I was just. Now Jack was a loss for word. Seize him, the major shouted. They're spies. Chapter 8. These are the times. Jack grabbed Annie's hand. We're not spies, he says. He rolled around to face George Washington. General Washington, remember those words you said to your man? Jack says. You should believe them yourself, sir. What are they talking about? George Washington asked. Jack yanked the captain letter from his bag. By the light of the lamp, he read the word to the captain has copied for his children. Those are the times that try man's souls, Jack read. But he that standeth now discern the love and thanks of man and woman. The harder the conflict, the more joyous of triumph. Jack looked at George Washington. Even if things look impossible, you should keep going, sir, he says. The harder things seems, the greater the truth, right? That's what you read on your man. You have to keep going for their sake. Yes, "And you have to keep going for our sake," said Annie. "For the sake of the future children in America, sir." As the wet snow hissed about them, George Washington stared a long moment at Jack and Danny. Finally, he put the hands on each of their shoulders. "I do not know who you are," he says. "I do not know how you know what you know. But I believe you. For your sake, and for the future children of America, we will march on." "Yay!" cried Danny. "Yay!" said Jack softly. He sighed with relief and put away the captain's ladders. "Now get back in the boat," said George Washington. "You must leave the fighting to us, to me and my men." Jack felt very grateful to George Washington and his whole army. They were risking their life for all the American children, past and futures. He could barely speak. "Thank you, sir," said Annie. Thank you both for telling me to listen to my own advice," said George Washington. He called to the rower waiting in the boat. "Take good care of those tools." George Washington climbed onto his horse. He looked down at Jack and Danny. "Merry Christmas," he says. Then the commander-in-chief rode away into the stormy darkness. Chapter 9. Flash. "All aboard," one of the rower called. Jack and Danny hurried down the steep riverbank. They climbed back into the boat. The crew pushed away from their shores. The boat started back through the ice, churning water of the Delaware River. Jack was freezing in the sleep and snow. He didn't worry about that now. He was thinking instead about how they had helped George Washington. He was thinking about how they had helped keep history on its course. Jack felt great. When they got to the riverbank, Jack and Danny jumped out of the boat. "Thanks," Jack called. Jack yelled to the rowers. With the wind at their back, Jack and Danny took off through the blizzard. They ran down the ice bank and Delaware River. Thunder rumbled in the snowy sky. Lightning zigzagged over the woods. "How will we find the treehouse?" cried Danny. "I don't know," said Jack. But don't worry, we'll find it." He felt like confidence now after meeting George Washington, after being thanked by George Washington. He and Danny raced on through the rains and snow and sleet. They ran along the riverbank until the bright flash of lightning lit up the skies. Then Jack saw it. The treehouse was directly through their left, high under tall trees covered with snows. "Over there!" he shouted. Jack and Danny ran toward the edge of the woods. In the dark, Jack looked up, searching for the treehouse. Lightning lit the woods again. Jack saw the rope ladder flapping wildly in the wind. Jack grabbed it. He grabbed it. "Annie," he called. "Here," she says. "Let's go," he says. They climbed up the swaying ladders and scrambled into the treehouse. They were soaking wet and covered with slush and snows. Annie grabbed a Pennsylvania book. "I wish we could go there," she shouted. The winds blew even harder. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 10. This peaceful place. Gray early light spilled into the treehouse. Bird sounded in the woods. The summer wind felt warm and gentle. Jack and Danny were wearing their nice dry clothes again. "Oh man," said Jack. "It's good to be home." "Yeah," said Annie, sighing. Back in this peaceful place." Jack pulled the cabin ladder out of his pack. He turned it over. It was addressed to Molly and Ben Sunder, Apple Tree Farm, Frog Creek, Pennsylvania. "Molly and Ben lived on the farm near those woods over 200 years ago," said Jack, and he gently touched the ladder. "Your dad is going to make it home, kid. He misses you," Annie whispered, as if she could stand a comforting word back through times. Jack carefully placed the special writing from Revolutionary War next to the writing from the Civil War. "Look," said Annie. She picked up the note lying on the corner. It said simply, "Come back on Tuesday." "Another message from Morgan," said Annie. Jack smiled. He pulled on his pack. "See you on Tuesday, Treehouse," he said. He started down the rope ladder. Annie followed. In the early daylight, they ran through the Frog Creek woods. Then they ran down the streets. They climbed onto their porch and rested against the railing. They looked out at the dawn sky. Jack remembered the whoosh of the cold wind on the Delaware. He remembered the hiss of the wet snows and the slush of the ice wave. He remembered George Washington reading to his men. The harder it conflicts, the more joyous the storm," Jack whispered. "Those words are true," said Annie. "Though it was the hard conflict, and I feel like the kind of glorious right now, don't you?" Jack laughed. "Yeah, definitely," he said. Then he and Danny slipped into their quiet peace house.